Okay, today we will talk about the individual in our organization. So, what we will be mostly focusing on is this one here about behavior and some perspectives on understanding organizational behavior in a more individual perspective. Let's try to relate it to this one that we have all been quite familiar with right now, I guess, that today we have reached the point where we will look at these guys, the people inside the organization. Those are the guys that we will be talking about. And the reason is that we would like to understand them, because if we can understand how they behave and why they behave the way they do, then it makes it more likely that we are able to, up here, make sure that our implementation of our strategies will actually come through. So when we're setting objectives and we are giving out tasks and we are allocating resources and figuring out how to monitor these things, it all ends up with these guys here, these people inside the organization. If they don't do what we would like them to do, then we can have really nice implementation plan. But if they are not with us, it's not going to work. So therefore, in order for us to execute implementation and make sure that the strategies we have chosen here, based on, for example, the market or based on the resources, or probably both, these strategies that we have chosen and we have laid out an implementation plan, we need these guys to follow it in order for us to make sure that our strategy comes through. So it basically all comes down to that people are more or less the most important thing in an organization. Let's try to dig into what is it that we could take a closer look at in order to understand people. So I call it strategic management of employees, and the key word here is behavior, and it is the behavior of these people. So behavior, I like to see it as a function, and that's the F. So behavior equals a function of, and the first thing is more personal factors, meaning that these guys over here, let's take this person right here, that person has a personality and has some personal issues, specific ways of seeing things, specific attitudes, etc., and a specific personality. So his behavior and her behavior here, they are clearly a function of their personal factors. Also, looking into how people behave, it's not only necessary to see what about their personal issues. It's also important to see what kind of environment are they acting in. And of course, here also things like culture can come into play, because if we are in a specific culture and there might be certain specific ways of acting or doing things that might not have anything to do with the personal factors of this guy here, it might have to do with the environment. But in our walkthrough of this, I'll be focusing more or less on the personal factors, and leave the environment to other courses that you might follow. Now, what kind of personal factors can we take a look at? Well, we have first attitudes and values, and of course we will dig into all of these during this lecture here. Then we have personality, and we have perception, and these three are quite important to understand the basic behavior of people, because if we know something about, are you positive or negative towards this particular thing, it could be also a person, then it might actually be able for us to kind of predict that if you're negative towards this, then your behavior might be like this. And if your values are like this, then your behavior might be like this. If you have a certain personality, then we might predict that your behavior in this case would be like this. And if you perceive the reality in this way, then you might have a behavior that's going like this. So that's the whole idea, trying to figure out how do people behave. And in order to figure out how they behave, we can take a closer look at their attitudes and values, their personality, and the perception of these people. Means how they perceive reality. And then, of course, we have over here the E about the organization, the work factors. We have families, peer groups, life experiences, etc. Everything else that is surrounding people here. Good. Let's now try to here take a closer look at the first one, attitudes. What is an attitude? Well, an attitude is what we call an evaluative statement, either favorable or unfavorable, concerning objects, people, or events. So it reflects how someone feels about something. And we can be favorable or unfavorable towards events. Could be a happening or something. Could also be towards other people, of course. And it can be towards objects. So that's the idea about attitudes. They end up having us saying, yes, I like this, or no, I do not really like this. But where do these attitudes come from? How can we understand them? And that's what we would like to take a closer look at. Now, if we look at an attitude as something consisting of these three areas here, a cognitive, affective, and behavioral, you could say, segment of an attitude. So we have these three segments of attitudes. Then you or I or we ending up being, let's say, in favor of something can come from a cognitive process where we are thinking about something and then we are basically thinking this is quite good, so I'm positive. But it may also come from some other parts of this here. And if we take a look at the other segment, the affective segment, then it's more about our emotions. That our emotions can be the strong one that is kind of more or less right away creates a positive or maybe a negative attitude towards something. If you experience to meet a person, you might be kind of attracted to that person right away and you might feel quite positive, or you might feel quite negative and feel not attracted and you might have a negative attitude towards that person right away. Then we have the behavioral segment of it. That is where we behave. So our behavior, the things we do, might end up to create a positive attitude. If we do something, let's say, often enough, and then we kind of get used to it and we start thinking that, yeah, okay, it's not that bad. And we might even start feeling about it that, yeah, I'm feeling quite okay with this. So we may not have to think about things or feel anything to have a positive attitude. The whole attitude creation might start with us simply behaving in a specific way. Maybe even we don't know. Now, some of you who have read marketing might also find these familiar, and that's true because in marketing, you will have what we call effective hierarchy models for communication and laying out how to communicate. And here we are working with, for example, an AIDA model, attention, interest, desire, action. So that's attention over here and kind of interest, desire, and action down here. So these are some segments that is used quite often in different situations, but it all comes down to understanding what is it about this that creates people's way of being favorable or unfavorable towards this. Okay, let's try to have an example here. This is from the book. try not to look at this out here. And of course, now that I have said you shouldn't look at it, it's pretty difficult not to look at it because I draw your attention to it, but we'll get back to it. First, we need to understand this one over here. So cognitive means evaluation and means the thinking process. So if my supervisor gave a promotion to a coworker who deserved it less than me, then I think my supervisor is unfair. And that would probably create a negative attitude towards my supervisor. Could also be, and then I start to feel that my supervisor, I really don't like that person. And then I start to look for another job. So my behavior is that I claim or complain about my supervisor to anyone. So it all started out by the supervisor giving a promotion to a coworker. It might also have been that the whole negative attitude started out by me having a feeling that I simply dislike my supervisor. And that made me look more into everything he or she does and evaluate it in a way that would simply lead me to kind of confirm myself that yes, I'm right. I'm right in not liking this particular person. So attitudes, looking at it from a management perspective, we can help people by treating them, you could say in this case, fairly. But if we are not helping people to understand what goes on, we might have a situation where people start to evaluate what we are doing as a company and start evaluating it in a negative way. So therefore, information about what we are doing and making sure that people do understand it can help the people to have a positive attitude towards our company and maybe a change we're about to do. Also, we need to make sure that people do not dislike our organization or dislike our management. And of course, that has to do with the way we manage and the way we treat people as well. And we also have to make sure that people have good surroundings within our organization, making sure that the working environment is okay and good, so that people have a reason to behave in the best positive way. Means that they are supporting not getting hurt when they are at work, and they have a good relationship to their co-workers and their managers, etc. So as a manager and organization, we can work with these segments: cognitive, affective, and behavioral, and help on a general scale to work with people's attitudes towards our organization. Now, let's try to get back to these CAB or CBA. It simply means, do we start by having a cognitive experience, and then it kind of is supported by the affective segment and then the behavioral one? Or do we start to have a CBA, that means a cognitive experience, and then we go straight to behavior, and then we go to the affective one? So these suggestions here are simply that the attitude can get started being positive or negative at any of these three places here. And then it can work on by from the B, go to the A and to the C. So we simply need to recognize that attitudes are a complex issue, and but we do have possibilities to understand why people act the way they do based on their attitudes. So do attitudes dictate behavior? No, not always. And sometimes it's actually quite reverse. And we have this thing called cognitive dissonance. That's an incompatibility between two or more attitudes, or between behavior and attitudes. And the idea is that individuals, we as people, we try to reduce uncomfortable gaps. That means the dissonance that we have. And if we feel positive towards something, and we at the same time think that this is not okay, then we would try to reduce that gap or dissonance by simply start to think that okay, it's probably okay because I feel it's okay. So we will kind of adapt to one of the segments in order to make sure that we are comfortable with the whole situation. And therefore, we could say down here, for example, that the desire to reduce dissonance depends on the importance of the segment or the elements of it. So if I'm feeling attracted to a person, but I'm thinking that person is might not really be me, but I'm really attracted to it, then what do I prioritize? Is it the feeling that I have, or is it what I'm thinking? So therefore, we can work with people's attitudes and understand people's attitudes by understanding the importance that they give to the segments or elements here, and the degree of the individual influence that they have, and the rewards that's involved in the dissonance. Do we get some reward by this? You could say, do not look into the cognitive part about thinking about the person, but I'm more focusing at the feelings. So do I get a larger reward by going with my feelings and saying yes to this person instead of going with my evaluation from a more cognitive perspective, saying I should stay away from that person? So in that way, we can try to understand our resources and our behavior. So behavior follows attitudes. That was kind of my claim in the start, but we also have these moderating variables. And some of the powerful moderators are importance that I just gave an example of. And then correspondence to behavior, accessibility, social pressure, direct personal experience, and knowing attitudes then simply help us predict behavior. And also maybe knowing something about people's prioritize here. Okay, then with that in place, that we know that attitudes can be formed in these ways with these three segments, and it does have an influence on our behavior, then what about values? Well, we have values as we understand as basic convictions on how to conduct yourself or how to live your life that is personally or socially preferable. So it's basically about how to live life probably for these guys. Now, one thing is to understand their attitudes, where they might come from, but the values might have a great influence on attitudes that these people have. If you live in a specific culture, a national culture, then your values will also be uh, affected by the culture that you're living in, simply because the culture on an overall basis kind of lay out values that are the proper values in this society. And anybody who lives in a specific culture will also experience these values, because the values will turn into norms, namely the ways that we are expected to behave in a specific culture. So culture is behind values, and values are to a large degree dictating behavior of people living in specific cultures. So Danes might behave differently than people from France, for example. And it has to do with their culture and the values that we have in Denmark and France. And also Asian countries, we have different kinds of values in those countries that we have in European countries. So there will be different kinds of values indicating that these people, when they come from a different area in the world, they will have a different behavior, because they will simply have been taught that there are different ways of living your life in a proper way. Let's try to take a little closer look at some of these things. So the importance of values cannot be stressed enough, I guess, because values represent what is right and what is wrong in a culture. And the same goes for cultures within companies. You certainly also find right and wrongs, not only in a national culture, but certainly also in a specific company. And within a country, you can have specific areas geographic areas where they have completely different rights and wrongs in the same country, but just in different areas. So if you want to blend in, you need to understand the right and the wrongs. Then another thing about values and their importance is that they influence the perception of the world around us. And here it simply means that if you have a specific setting of what is right and wrong, then the way you look upon the world will have a specific influence on how you observe the world and what you are processing about the information that you see. Then it implies that some behaviors and outcomes are more preferred over others. That's pretty obvious, because if something is right and something is wrong, and we would like to have a specific behavior that is supporting the rights and not the wrongs. And then it provides foundation and understanding of attitudes, motivation, and behaviors. So values, culture and values, really important things to understand in order to help us digging into attitudes and motivation and behaviors. And just to show you some ideas about values, we have this Rokit survey where the result is that we have some terminal values and we have some instrumental values. Now, the instrumental values are those values that you kind of take upon yourself, or this within a society or within a company, saying that these are the ways you should be in order to get to these values here. So if you want to have a comfortable life, then that's a terminal value in this research. Then in order to have that, you should probably be ambitious and broad-minded. I'm not saying this is how it is. I'm just giving an example, saying that if your overall value is to have a comfortable life, then it might be that you would be ambitious right now and broad-minded in order to get there. So of course, we would all have different kinds of terminal values, and we probably also all have different kinds of instrumental values, values that would help us getting there. But what is important to recognize is that when you're looking at instrumental values and terminal values, culture is something that helps us understand what is more in and what is more out when we are looking into cultures, and therefore also understanding why do people from Japan, why do they behave in this way? Why do people from France behave in this way? And it probably has to do with their terminal values and their instrumental values. So understanding values can help you to understand people in your organization. And if you're a manager and you have people from other cultures, then understanding their values and their attitudes creation will help you understand how to lead that particular person. If you are in an organization that you have a manager with a different set of values coming from a different culture, this can help you understand why the manager is acting like the manager is, and thereby it will help your communication with the manager. Okay, so that was attitudes and values. Let's take a closer look at personality. One of the very widely used is the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And it means that we can have different or 16 possible personality types, because they're kind of measuring on these 4 different areas. And I've simply just found here a free test on the net, and I have been taking the test myself. And these results that you see are my results. So I thought that was an okay way to deal with it. So remember, why would you test me? Well, you could, from a student perspective, say, well, I would like to have a personality test of my teacher, simply because I'm going to an oral exam, or I'm going to have that person as a supervisor. So I would like to know a little bit more about what is that person and what kind of personality do I get in front of me. So, and that means how can I then take advantage of the knowledge of how the teacher is and thinks and prioritize things. So in my case, my test came up with here 3 different types of these combinations. And one type is the ENFJ. It's called the teacher. And it simply just states that it's a very good match. You can read the text yourself. I'm not going to go into depth with this. But in this case, this particular test here come up with, in this case, 3 different ones. The next one is what they call the inventor. And what you should notice is that it's these combinations of letters here. And these are the combinations that we will get back to. But for now, it seems that I have a good match on what they call a teacher, and I have a good match on what they call an inventor. And then they came up with a third one as well, called the commander. That's also a very good match. So, and there's a short description here in the text, kind of elaborating a little bit on what does it mean to be teacher, inventor, and commander. And apparently, the test shows that I have kind of all of these 3 in my personality. Now, if we take a closer look at these indicators, then the first one, we have the E, extrovert and introvert, sociable and assertive over here, quiet and shy at the other end. So what are the results of me? Okay, these are the results. As you can see here, we have the introvert over here, that's 29%, and over here, extrovert, 71. So this indicates that the test shows that I'm more extrovert than I'm introvert. So what does that mean? Well, it says here in the text, as an extrovert, you're primarily focused upward on the world around you. You seek stimulation and activity and enjoy busy environments. You are energized by activity and by interacting with other people. You tend to be talkative and express yourself easily. So that is the first result of the test. And if you had tested me because I was going to be your supervisor, then you should reflect upon how can I use this information here about this supervisor when I'm going to have meetings with the supervisor. And that is the way we could use it in a very good way, because as a manager, if you have an employee with this, then you would get good ideas about how to approach the specific employee in order to help that employee doing his job or coming through a change process or something else. Then we have the sensing and the intuitive. Let's see how I did on that one. Oh my God. And here, apparently I'm way more intuitive than I'm sensing. So that means if we go down here and looking at these keywords, then apparently I am observing patterns and connections. I'm interpreting meaning. I'm imagining potentials, ideas and concepts, innovation and creativity, possibilities for the future. And again, looking at these words over here, noticing details, experiencing the present moment, etc. So contrasting these two help us to understand if I'm your supervisor, if this is me, how can you take advantage of my knowledge if I'm not good at doing it myself? Or if this is me as an employee, how can we help this employee to be a good employee and face and do the job that I'm supposed to? Then we have thinking and feeling. And here I have apparently just more or less the same. Feeling, thinking. The description is right here about who I am when we have this kind of both enough or more or less the same thinking and feeling segment. So Can we use it? Yes, because it means that I'm both thinking and feeling at the same time, and we can use these indicators down here to say that I can be quite logical, but can also act out of ideals, etc. Can I engage and be emotional? Yes, I can. Can I also be unbiased and impartial? Yes, I can. So in this way, we simply need to understand what to call for from that particular person. And the last one, judging and perceiving. Here, it seems that I'm more judging than I'm perceiving, and the judges are over here. Okay, so I'm not going to spend more time on that, but go further on to the big five. That's simply just another model of how to understand behavior of our people. And we could take tests regarding that as well, testing the traits that we might have. I'll just very fast run through this, just to give you an idea. The big five consist of big five traits. And then we have this idea about why is it relevant and what does it affect. And it's also a test that is used by psychologists around the world in order to understand how people work and how they are. So the first thing is about emotional stability. If we are quite stable on an emotional basis, then we tend to have less negative thinking and fewer negative emotions, and less hypervigilant. And then that actually leads to higher job and life satisfaction and a lower stress level. So if we test people and they come up with emotional stability, then we might find that these are people that have a higher job satisfaction and they have a lower stress level. And we can use that when we are dealing with people and helping people and leading people. And then we have the other ones. We have extroversion, same thing, same logic. If you are more extrovert, then you have this, and you will get this: higher performance, enhanced leadership, higher job and life satisfaction. So the idea is to use these and test for openness as well. I'll move on to the next one: agreeableness, and the last one, conscientiousness. And if you test these 5 elements, just like you tested for the 4 elements in the Myers-Briggs, where I went into a little bit more detail, I could have done the same here. And in each case, you will find the results applicable to understanding the person in front of you and understand why the person might behave in a specific way, but also to understand how the person may behave in the future when we are going to go through with this change, for example, or if we are going to ask the person to do a specific job. So it can help you lead in a better way and take care of your employees. Now, that was personality that can help us to understand these people here. If we look at the last one here from the P, the personal side, then we are going to take a closer look at perception. Now, what is perception? Perception is a process where we as individuals, we organize and interpret our sensory impressions in order to help us to understand and give meaning to our environment. And when we look at this, then this one is particularly important, that people's behavior is based on their perception of what reality is, not on reality itself. Now, you are all listening to me and me talking about perception. I'm saying exactly the same thing, but you are at your end at different stages in your life. You have different kinds of experiences. You have had listened to people that might have the sound of these people might sound like my voice, for example, and others may not. And therefore, you are all listening to exactly the same thing. And you are seeing exactly how I'm using my mouse here to go over here and saying that reality perception is not about what reality is. It's about how we believe reality is. So reality itself is not really part of it, because when you are listening to and seeing the same thing, you all perceive it in different ways. And that is so important also within communication, that we constantly need to remember that what people see and hear is based on their perception, not on what we think that they see or hear. And therefore, reality is kind of important. And therefore, we should recognize that reality, is it reality or isn't it? Well, it depends on the eyes who sees. So the world as it is perceived is therefore the world that is behaviorally important to us. Therefore, observation, I've just thrown this in from Edgar Schein, also a psychologist, that when we observe something, we simply see and hear more or less what we expect or anticipate. That means when you are listening to me, if you have seen the slides before, then you might have created ideas about, oh, he's probably going to talk about this and this. Then you expect something. And if I say something completely different, then you might not even notice it, because you would expect me or anticipate me to do a specific thing. And that goes for all situations. We do expect or anticipate lots of things, unless in most cases that we are in quite different situations than we are used to. Then we are often more open to impressions, visiting another culture. But then again, being very open to lots of impressions without expecting or anticipating, that can also lead to what we call a cultural shock. So if we are in another culture, bombarded with lots of impressions, and we are opening ourselves to them, we might actually also need to close down for some days to kind of work with all of these impressions. So it also means that we do not think and talk about what we see, but we see what we are able to think and talk about. I think that's also quite important for us to understand, because if I show you a picture of something and an elephant, then if you know what an elephant is, then you will see it and you will see, oh, that's an elephant. And then you can think about an elephant and you can start talking about the elephant. But if you have never seen an elephant before, then you won't even think that's an elephant, because you don't know what it is. And therefore you don't know how to talk about it as well. So if we are facing things that we do not know anything about, then we cannot see it. We might have a feeling, but we cannot really see it. So if we have that in an organization or in a partnership with someone, if we don't know what it is, then we can only see what we're able to think and talk about. But we cannot really think and talk about what we see, because we might see something, but we may not see what reality is. That goes along with the other sentence before. So it is important that we understand that people can more or less only think and talk about what they know something about. If they don't know about a specific area, they cannot see it. So if you walk through a company and you have a communication background, you will notice lots of things about communication. But if you walk through a company having a medical background, you will notice a lot of things about people's expressions and maybe how sick they look like, etc. So we see with the eyes that we have. Also, denial, that we might refuse to see certain categories of information as they might apply to ourselves. And we might project to others what is actually something that we are doing ourselves. And true observation is to know oneself and one's own predispositions, stereotypes, and preconceptions. So you cannot really understand anyone else unless you understand yourself. It's also something we need to bear in mind. So when we are perceiving our environment, we can use some shortcuts like selective perception, where we are simply filtering based on what we would like to see. And we have halo effects, contrast effects, and stereotyping. I'm not digging into these because they're kind of easy to kind of understand here. And then we have attribution theory. I'd like to talk a little bit about that one because we have internal and external attribution. And it's about how we behave. Let's try to take a closer look at this. Well, maybe you know that sometimes we have it quite easy to blame people first and not the situation. So we might have a tendency to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate the influence of internal factors when we are judging behaviors of others. So if that person failed, it was probably his fault. It has nothing to do with the situation. And on the other hand, often it's our success. So we have a tendency to have own successes to be related to internal factors, while blaming for failure, of blaming others for the failures. And that comes from the external effect. So we are good, and if we do not do good, then it has to do with something from the outside. But when we are looking at others, we tend to do it in the opposite way. Now, how do we work with this? Well, we could take this one and look into this attribution theory. We have these guys here, and they have individual behavior. And if we want to understand that behavior, and if we want to understand this guy's behavior here, then we could see distinctiveness. That's whether an individual display different behaviors in different situations. So if we have a high degree of distinctiveness, meaning acting differently in different situations, then it's probably something that comes from the outside that is influencing the person to have this individual behavior, because otherwise the person would behave in the same way. If we have consensus, does everyone who faces a similar situation respond in the same way as the individual did? So we're simply comparing and evaluating, is this person, is that consensus? If the consensus is high, then we would probably have external, because that is influenced by the environment in this case, and explains why the individual behave in that way. And the last one, consistency. Is the person behaving in the same way over time? If the person is behaving in the same way over time, then we would say, okay, that's because the person is internally attributed in this particular case. So we can use attribution theory to understand why is a specific behavior in that specific way by understanding distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Very useful tool to evaluate when you have employees that might not be acting the way you think or should. And then there's a link between perception and decision making, because we have a problem, and perceived problems require that we make decisions. And let's just take a quick look at this about bounded rationality. And bounded rationality is about we seek solutions that is satisfactory and not necessarily the best. So that take us through that we have limited research for criteria for alternatives, and we also have limited review of alternatives, and we simply make a decision that is satisfactory. Lots of people do that. Just take examples from your own life. I'm pretty sure you will find lots of examples. And the last thing here about perception, that's about JOHARI. It's a tool that we use for supervision, coaching, and also in teams, where we have two dimensions. We have something that is known to ourselves and unknown to ourselves, and something that is known to others and unknown to others. When we put these together in this here, then we have that we have known by ourselves and known by others. That's kind of a free area, and that is how we work with it. And let's see here, we have the open area. This is where we simply talk to each other. We express ourselves, we exchange histories, etc. Then we might have a blind area. It's known by others, but it's not known by me. So I need other people to tell me about this. Otherwise, I can't get it into the open area. So using it for coaching and supervision, it can be quite important. Telling other people about how they seem to be affecting other people. So helping them to get to know themselves. I may also hide things from my environment, and I might have areas that is quite unknown. But in working with my blind area and working with telling people about myself, I can get this area, the open area, pretty much open, and that means that we can get to know each other. That's also why we use teamwork and why we use team building processes to get people's open area larger, to get them to know each other. And the way to work with it is like this. We can tell about ourselves, others can ask us questions, and that will lead us into the blind area, and telling about ourselves will open the area where we do not hide anything. And then we simply work our way down here, and we might get to know things about ourselves that we didn't know before, simply by someone asking us questions and we telling something about ourselves. So a very widely used tool in coaching processes, but you can also use it to understand your managers and your employees. Yes, and that ends the first